underline what Dennis said, that I am not an astrologer. I am not a professional astrologer. This is very much hobby for me. I've gotten several birth chart readings, and one of my dear friends is a professional astrologer. And I see her at least once a year for a check-in about my transits, and I find them to be extremely helpful for myself. And I guess I'll just give a little bit of background into why I find it helpful and interesting, because I think it's helpful for how I'm approaching this and looking at your chart today. So I think the thing about astrology that so many people are very quick to dismiss is because really people only know their sun sign, which is the sign that it's like, what's your birthday? It tells you your sign. That's who you are. And so many people are like, okay, there's 12 signs and it's my entire personality. You can't dictate one person by that. Of course. And any astrologer and anyone who even knows anything about astrology besides just their sun sign is going to say, absolutely. It's a deeply complex system, just like our solar system is. So if anyone tells you, oh yeah, you're Dennis is a Gemini, and it's like, well, you're a Gemini, so you're blah, 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 blah. Don't trust that person. They don't know what they're talking about when it comes to astrology. And just like anything else, whether you're more spiritually and metaphysically leaning, and so you enjoy astrology, or maybe you're a bit more psychology based, and so Clifton Strengths or Myers-Briggs, or maybe you're a bit more therapy minded and the Enneagram is something that you really love. I'm a huge Enneagram fan. So all of these kind of personality assessments, like you were just saying, Dennis, they're tools, right? And who's to say that any of it is true or false, but is it useful? Is it helpful? And anything that I think can give us more knowledge and insight into who we are, even if it's just a little glimmer of something, the more knowledge you have on the self, the more that you can grow. And the piece of astrology that I find super useful is the idea of the life cycle. So a natal birth chart.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so the natal birth chart is a circle. It's the circle that you see, when you first sent me all your information that was from CoStar, it pops up that circle and you see the lines connecting all the different signs and planets across.
Yeah.
If anyone is curious about getting their free birth chart, Cafe Astrology Online is like the popular one. CoStar also does a free one. I really love Chani. The Chani app is great, and they'll do a free birth chart for you as well. And the reason why it's in the circle is because astrology asserts that your life is a life cycle, and that your soul chose to be born at this specific time to go through these lessons, these soul expressions through this life. And every year you go through a cycle of your chart, but also your entire life is going through the cycle of the chart. So kind of similarly to how different planets rotate around the sun at different speeds, you are going through your chart in different places at different times, and where your planets are in your charts correlates to where they currently are in our sky and our solar system too. Because we're all on the Earth, we all experience current transits in similar ways, but also they impact us all differently based on our specific charts. Now, all that to say, there is also this added thing of like, okay, so it's definitely more complex than just your sun sign. Maybe I can grant that, right? What about twins that are born a minute or two apart that are vastly different people? This is where we get into a bit more complication with different styles of astrology. There's two different main styles of astrology. There is, I think it's Tropic and Vedic are the two I want to say, and it's like Western versus Eastern astrology is kind of the thing. And what most astrologers will say is that Western astrology tends to be more helpful for understanding your relationships and your kind of cycle through life lived out in this soul's expression. Eastern astrology tends to be a little bit more helpful for your soul's like spiritual path in a deeper, more metaphysical sense. So people tend to resonate with Western astrology more because it feels a bit more practical. It feels a little bit more relevant to their life. Whereas Eastern astrology may feel super off base, but it's describing more of because the Eastern astrology believes in like multiple lifetimes, it's describing a bigger cycle on the whole. So your birth chart on the whole is a description of the cycle that you are living out in this lifetime based on when your soul chose to be born. It also tells you your main challenges and the main things that you are going to kind of struggle with in this lifetime and grow through. And whether or not, similar to tarot, where it's like, if you get a bad prediction for the future, tarot doesn't say, well, that's 100% going to happen. Tarot says, if you continue down the path that you're on right now, this is what's going to happen. This is what your choices and your behavior is leading to. But you can change that. And astrology is similar in the sense that it's like, we're not saying that, you're going to have this horrible thing and you're never going to be able to overcome this personality trait. It's saying this is something you struggle with. And the more you learn about it, how can you use that, like alchemize that into a strength as opposed to letting it control you. There's so much more here. Again, I'm not a professional astrologer. I will be using whole sign astrology, which may mean nothing to a lot of people, but for those who know a little bit more, I think it's important to note there are a few different ways to do an astrological chart. Whole sign, I think, is a little bit more useful just because it allows you to look a little bit more forward thinking, but just so anyone knows that that's kind of how I'm looking at Dennis's chart. And again, not an expert, but let's get into it. And then I want to know a little bit more because right before we hit record 2, you mentioned, how astrology is a bit it's a little hard to believe sometimes, right? But it's something you're opening up to more and more. So I want to hear more about that journey for you as well. So we'll start with your sun, moon, and rising. And if you know anything about anyone or anyone knows astrology, those are the big 3 that anyone talks about. Your sun is how you shine, right? Just like the sun, it's the rays that you shine out. It's your fiery core, but it is very much about how your personality shines out. Your moon is about your internal subconscious life, the inner workings and inner motivations, and oftentimes things that you may not even be aware are deeply controlling choices that you're making without even being aware of it. And then your rising or your ascendant, which is the sign that is coming up, that the sun is moving into as you're born, that is as you grow, as you evolve, as you change, as you step into your strength, what are the qualities that you are going to find expressed more and more. So for you, your sun is in Gemini. So this expresses oftentimes, a lot of people will say Geminis are two-faced, that they are hard to read, that they're liars, that they're dishonest. Other people will say they're amazing social creatures. They are chameleons. They know exactly how to fit into any different environment. Gemini is one of those signs. I think Scorpio is generally thought of as like the bad sign in astrology. If someone says you're a Scorpio, that's the one that generally people are like, ew, you're a Scorpio. And I don't like people doing that. I think we can all probably understand why, but Gemini is another one that it's like, if it's not Scorpio, Gemini kind of gets a bad rep. But I'm a Gemini rising, so I'll throw that out there as well. And I think that the Gemini sign is actually one of mirroring, right? And the reason why so many people, I think, distrust Geminis is because it's hard to understand what's actually underneath, because they're so good at mirroring what they see. because they can bounce off and reflect things back to people. The sign of Gemini is the twins, right? It is the two faces. It is being able to play devil's advocate. And people don't always like that. People don't like the opposite being brought to them, their mirror, their reflection being reflected back to them. But that is often how we learn more about ourselves. And so that's often how people will receive you, right? As being very fluid, very able to shift and change who you are depending on your environment. Now, your moon is in Aries, and this was something that I found deeply fascinating, knowing you and knowing how quickly you can have your passions lit up by different things and different interests. Your subconscious is deeply, deeply playful, fiery, but also like super strong id. Aries is the young sign, right? And oftentimes when you think about Aries, you think of people being like chaotic and all over the place and wild. But the thing about Aries that I think is actually the most important aspect of the sign is that it is the sign of the self. When you think of like ultimate ego, ultimate who am I? Look wherever Aries is in your chart, and how your Aries expresses. Because even if you don't super relate to your sun or your ascendant, there's something about how you relate to your identity about Aries. And so having this as your moon with Gemini as your sun, not only is there this ability that you have to match other people's energy, there's a deep questioning of who you actually are at the root too. Who am I? And that big identity self feeling elusive even to you. That it's like actually what is underneath all of this. I know I'm good at masking, right? As we've talked about a lot. Like I know that I can match other people. But if I'm not reflecting someone else, if I'm just a mirror looking at myself, what am I besides a mirror? What's underneath the mirror? Right. And really trying to identify that. And then we go into your rising ascendant, which is Taurus, which is all about home. Taurus, I think of the Scandinavian concept of hygge, that is like super cozy and warm and homey. It's like that's very Taurus to me. It is the homebody that wants a cozy blanket and a cup of tea and some nice slippers, but they are grounded, they are earthy, and they can be stubborn. So I think what this really tells us is when you are in your strength, is when you are alone with yourself, quiet, and at peace, right? Like, how do you really step into your own? It's when you get cozy. It's when you take care of yourself. It's when you step into these more, I don't necessarily want to say like rich, luscious parts of life, but like easy, warm, natural parts of life that make you feel grounded. And that's really the main challenge of your chart, is finding a way to maintain steadiness and groundedness despite your sun in your rising, or sorry, not your rising, your sun in your moon, in these big personalities constantly changing and evolving. You have a lot of very fluid energy that you feel called towards, and that other people perceive you as, so that they expect of you and they're calling you to as well. But when you feel quiet and at peace, what is there? And constantly trying to get back to this sense of quiet and peace despite all of this moving around, right? Within this, you have a lot of movement very early on in your chart. And then you have some pauses, and then you have some movement in the middle, and then you have some pauses, and then you have some movement at the end. So you have 3 very strong periods of time in years that you go through and in your life where it'll probably feel like, oh my gosh, so much is happening at once. Like if we break the year up into like the 4 seasons, right, or the 12 months, you'd have like the first 2 or 3 months are going to feel like a lot's going on in the year. And then you have 2 months that are like not much is happening and we're kind of going by, and then it's like, okay, stuff is picking up again. And then we'll have another pause, and then the end of the year it feels like stuff picks up again too. And you'll see this throughout a year and throughout your life cycle based on the chart, but this cycle of back and forth between motion and stillness is that kind of back and forth of your sun and moon kind of grappling with your ascendant, with your true nature, your true self, wanting to be stable, even though its nature is kind of chaotic, and fighting back and forth between this stability and chaos.